All right. Well, good morning, or just barely afternoon for some folks. My name is Shannon Goodman. I have a couple of different hats. One is on my shirt. I'm the Executive Director of Lifecycle Building Center in Atlanta, Georgia, a building material reuse organization. But I also am the current board president for Build Reuse, which is a national network of reuse organizations across the US. And I'm sure we've got many members on this call. And we're here to talk today about a really exciting grant program that has been released recently through EPA to be able to understand the carbon impact of our industry and create environmental product declarations, or EPDs, for reclaimed building materials. And before we kind of dive into that more, I just wanted to set the stage and say that our intention for today is to give you all an opportunity to ask us questions about this grant opportunity. We are working on an application. We've hired a consultant who's on the call, and I am sure is also going to share a little bit of just high-level information, and that is Brad Guy. So I'm going to turn it over to him in just a second, but just wanted to set the stage because we want to give you a chance to ask us questions about how we're going about the application, but also for us to learn from you in terms of what your thoughts are related to this issue of embodied carbon and, tracking and understanding the carbon impact of what you do every day. So with that, Brad, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, and then I'm going to quickly hand it over to Mike and back and forth. So let me do my screen. So if you can all see the slide, a brief overview for today, a summary of our, and I misspelled the word output, sorry about that. So this is an EPA program. I think Natalie's gonna post a link if you wanna go into the deep details. There is a link for the program. The overall initiative is reducing embodied carbon from construction materials through the Inflation Reduction Act. So if you're able, Natalie, to do that first poll, this is for the reuse industry. So at least from our proposal. So we'd really like to know who you are in that in this industry. So if you can just choose one of these options, and I know people do a lot of different things. So we have a primary and a secondary. And I'll leave it to Natalie. How does this all work?
I see people responding, so it must be working.
Okay.
So yes, there's the first question, your primary activity, and then the same options for the second question, that would be your secondary activity. So if you're not looking at your screen, just listening along, this is a good time to pop onto your screen and answer those questions for us. It would be super helpful.
I assume you might get a little bar chart or something that
Yes.
shows, okay. And I'll talk a little bit, but not too much. Hopefully we get the results.
Hey,
we are looking at a certain range of funding. Somebody was going to talk.
hey, Brad, and I'm just letting you know, since me and Shannon represent the same org, I'm just going to let her respond. Okay.
Sure thing.
If you go onto the website, or I'll just tell you, this is a grant program between 250,000 and 10 million. There's more details or funding ranges within those amounts, but Build Reuse is looking around the $5 million range. It is a 5-year program. And fundamentally, one of the core activities is financial and technical support to reuse industry to develop EPDs for the reuse facilities and processes. We're going to have a large core educational component. as part of EPA's interest, there needs to be wide dissemination of the communication of these environmental impacts of different building product categories. So salvage is one. There's also one for concrete, steel, and some other very large quantity use products in the United States. I'm going to leave it to Mike a little bit on why we hope you think this is a good idea. Fundamentally, we're trying to gauge your interest and potentially responding if we are successful to actually carry out the work.
So
Great. Thanks,
yeah,
Natalie.
we should be seeing the results now. I think I encourage anybody who answered other to throw their others in the chat. So maybe we have a better sense of that because there is a good percentage of people who did respond with that.
That's excellent. And then do we scroll down to see the secondary? Yep. So scroll down to see the secondary, right? And so you got about 33% salvage. Other, again, is about a third of the responses. So Mike Gable, if you're here,
I am.
could you provide, I think it's best coming from you, your perspective as a very long time and established and very well-known director of a very successful program. Your insights on the benefit of doing this.
Yes, I can do that. Thanks, Brad. So just a real quick comment also on the poll that Natalie just showed the results of, and it seems like there are a lot of folks that clicked on other, and then I think maybe Olivia put in the chat that she was involved in government and maybe doing some grants to deconstruction operations. And I would say, I would encourage those of you who are in government or who are supporting our community, our industry, when you're in a position to do that, if you can if you can encourage and share the recording and the information that will come out of this process, because ultimately what we are going to ask folks at the end of this is to submit a letter in support of our application, but also if you're a deconstruction contractor, a building material reuse operator, anybody that's physically handling reclaimed and used building materials, we would like letters of support from you folks to respond in the positive, that if we put out an RFP asking for your participation in collecting data that we need to create LCAs and EPDs, that is something that you would be interested in being considered for participating in that data collection. So that's a super critical component of this, and Brad's going to talk about it a little bit more. I think just from my perspective of why this is important and why we need to be doing it, I think that this is hopefully and should open up some good marketing opportunities for us. I think it's going to allow folks to be able to, contractors and people and different municipalities and federal government to be able to compare the benefits of using reclaimed materials in terms of our carbon impacts to new material. That's kind of a head-to-head competition that we don't really have good data around. And to be able to create a carbon label for the materials that we all handle, I think puts us in a position that we're not in right now, and allows people to make the most environmentally conscious decision when we're trying to deal with the impacts of embodied carbon. I also think that it will also allow us on the education front, to get this concept out into the general public more and to understand its importance. And again, just lift all of the boats that are working in some capacity to communicate to the public that reuse is critically important, that it's an activity that we should be actively and aggressively engaging in to deal with climate change. And I think a lot of folks haven't made that connection. So I'm sure that other folks that work in the architecture field will have some additional perspectives on this and information that they would like to see to help them promote within their industry why we should be, why architects and designers should be pursuing and convincing their colleagues to pursue reclaimed materials and the process of deconstruction. So I'm going to turn it back over to Brad to go through some of the details of the data that I think he's looking to collect, or he may be ready to just say, let's open it up for questions. But I'm going to make sure that he's at that stage of the information that he wants to present.
Thanks, Mike. I can explain a lot, but I think there's also this element of how far along people are and their understanding of this thing called life cycle assessment, or measuring environmental benefits of products or anything. So perhaps we could open it up. And if somebody has a really fundamental question, we can start with that. But, have you heard of this grant program to date? Have you heard the term embodied carbon? Is this something you see now on your radar screen that's important, both personally, professionally, and so on? So is Natalie going to be moderating that, or we can do it through the chat, or just opening mics, or however you want to do it?
I'll keep an eye on questions in the chat as they come through. So yeah, I welcome anyone to pop in, but yeah.
So any questions right now? Is this all new to you? It would be a question if you want to ask. And I guess that would be like a raise hand, perhaps, Natalie.
So I would like to respond to a question in the chat if nobody else wants to kind of kick off this conversation.
Sure.
So there is a response. I would like to ask the person who responded that looks like an architect and wanting to know how to put material reuse and deconstruction into their architecture practice. And I don't want to mispronounce this person's name. Hedgie? Is that the first name of this person? Is that to everyone?
Yes.
I'm going to ask, so I'll ask you the question as an architect, if the reuse industry was able to, or in a strong position to actually label our materials as low carbon and give you for you to be able to give your clients the impact or the lesser impact from a climate standpoint, do you think that would drive more interest in your field for architects to specify material reuse or encourage deconstruction to happen as part of projects that you work on?
I think you're addressing Maddie, not Hedgie. I'm not an architect.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the wrong. Oh, sorry. Maddie, yes, you're right. I was
Yes.
looking at the bottom of the message and not the top. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Well, I will admit I am fairly new to the profession, so I'm pretty much just like learning a lot of the fundamentals of architectural practice and design. So I think it makes it kind of interesting. It's like this, I kind of need to know more, and continue to learn those fundamentals before I really get into like some of this nitty-gritty stuff. But at the same time, like I'm trying to, I'm working with other architects in the firm who are interested in similar things. And I think there are a lot of challenges. I think everyone is attracted to the idea of like this word of sustainability, but when it comes to working with a client, cost really tends to be the driving variable. So yeah, which is partly why I'm here, because I hear the word like grants or like things like that might help counter some of those challenges, the financial concerns. So yeah, so I'm not exactly sure if I really fully answered your question, but yeah, I'm just here to learn more because we do want to make our projects more sustainable. We're tracking things like we're starting to track embodied carbon and things like that, but it is on mostly virgin material projects. So.
Hey, Mike, this is Jay on that. I'm, with Maddie. I think to me, part of this, and it's architects, but it's even, owners that scope projects, so that if we do have a way for accounting and can actually make product declarations around low carbon materials, that I do think there'll be incentives in the marketplace to do that. And so that would be number one, is we're kind of setting the platform so that Maddie and others can look at, if they have clients that say that, they're looking at, carbon and low carbon and carbon off, doing that. And they may even be looking at it from the perspective of being able to finance it through the carbon market as well, of having the means to do that, number one. And then number two would be the broader question of, having materials and those low carbon materials out of the product declarations in the supply chain to be able to offer those in the marketplace if an architect decides to scope it in to make sure those materials are available. Those are kind of my two thoughts on that.
Just again, another, it seems, Brad, we might want to address, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat where I think people are asking, what kind of support is directly available for activities like deconstruction, and I want to start a reuse operation, or is there money available for that? I think, a lot of questions about capacity building. And I think it would be helpful if maybe you did a quick
Yeah.
explanation of what the EPA is not funding as part of
Okay.
this program
Yeah, so
that
there's
we wish they would fund, but they're
what they won't fund, what they will fund, and what we hope. In fact, as Jay alluded to, this will help you attract the other funding because it'll give you the basis for the ask. So it will not fund literal, actual deconstruction or construction projects. Or, for example, a facility improvement be a construction project. Large capital equipment purchases. What it is funding is fundamentally information to create the metrics and the labels that convey. So again, it's not just say the architects of the world, but it could also be your local municipal government for a grant opportunity or a federal grant opportunity or a private green capital. So there's something called green banks, which are
right.
set up to provide capital, and the basis of that is environmental returns. So that's, you can't do that if you can't say what you're doing. And for build reuse, the more direct capacity that to help you with in terms of creating the metrics, a scale would be entirely fundable. iPads, software, really the tools, upgrading, let's call it. I don't know, everybody's different inventory systems and so on, but basically this analysis is based on an inventory of everything, the energy, water, the materials, the waste of your operation. So anything that is needed for that is a quote eligible expense. And we hope in the longer term that by building the capacity of build reuse to help you carry out the work, that in the future the cost become minimal, very low to do it again, if you know what I mean. The first time could be a little bit more labor intensive, but to streamline these processes in the future. So as you go, you can continue to update in as cost-effective manner as possible. So I hope that answers. We can't give you money to build a building, but hopefully we'll give you tools to convey the benefits to somebody else who will help you fund your new building. And I'm trying to read some of the chat as well. Maybe I should clarify. So EPA has identified in their terms what they call surplus, or sorry, what they call salvage materials. They do not include recycled content or surplus, overstock. I know there's a lot of mixture of those types of materials, but we need to sort of separate out the streams of materials which do in fact come from existing buildings or had some prior use. That's what they're calling salvage and reuse.
Just got a quick question.
Yep.
So if I'm hearing this correctly, I want to address one of the last things you said. They're not looking at materials that are being recycled, say 2x4s that get ground up and turned into mulch, they're not looking for data on that?
Correct.
Okay. And then if I'm following you correctly, because one of our programs is deconstruction and, we teach it. So the ask for them is the tools to collect the data only, or are you saying tools
No.
to work a deconstruct job?
Uh, so do you mean tools like a hammer versus an iPad that can help you better estimate an inventory and sell and things like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to get the definition of tools and what that encompasses so I have a better idea, because we already have all the scales and we've been collecting data for over a year. So I'm wondering what else are we able to ask for that would be able to help us process and go through materials?
So software, obviously training your staff. So the cost of knowledge, um, equipment, quote unquote, that might help you be more sophisticated. Again, like an iPad or some other tool that can help you identify and measure. Um, I don't. So nail kicker. You probably know what that is. We wouldn't fund you to buy nail kickers because that is, although it's not a capital cost, it's not really a tool that informs your environmental output in terms of carbon effects. Does that help?
Yeah, that gives me a much better idea of what we would be looking for. Yeah, software would help. Training definitely. Tablets, laptops, anything to process
Correct. Yep.
the data easier.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I got a much better idea.
Robert, the other thing that when we talk about tools is so that you can have a different conversation with your local governments and other folks that might be putting together climate action plans and implementation grants, that you can incorporate your data into that through the use of those tools that you use as a way of funding your operations, right? Again, so it's really to get us into the world of climate and carbon reduction. And any tools that help you do that is what would be of value here.
Okay. Yeah. And I note, and to follow what you just said, Jay, someone asked what software we might be scale software we're using. We're not using any software. We've got huge 300-pound floor scale. We've got bench scales. We've got um, um, cargo scales, and we just take all that data and put it into spreadsheets. So right now we're just using Excel or Google Sheets collecting that data. So we even have axle scales for when big trucks come in, we can weigh trucks coming in and going out. So there wasn't necessarily any software we're using, but now that you folks have been bringing that up, I'm like, gee, how is there a software that we could look at using to disseminate the information to folks easier? So I appreciate everyone's insight on this. Gives me a much better direction to go.
And for those who don't have a scale, they could buy one. You may not need one, but others can. And now, Robert, I'm going to research a Bluetooth scale. I'm gonna see, wow, is there a wireless scale? Because right, if there were such a thing, you could streamline the spreadsheets.
I like
So
that
if there
idea.
were such a thing, like an app or a digital scale that's connected to a wireless function, that would be entirely fundable.
If my digital scale at home that connects to my Fitbit is a thing, I have to imagine that what you're talking about exists.
Absolutely. Wow, we just need a bigger one then.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
So, Brad, I think, so I want to, I want to make sure that we're being really clear to folks on the call that the things that Robert just talked about, small tools, scales, things like that, those, and I apologize if I'm saying something you already realize or you already know. Individual operations, this grant opportunity from the EPA is not, the EPA is not going to respond to small individual operations grant request. What we're trying to do as Build Reuse is that we are trying to collect data from as many operations like yours as possible. And what we want to put into the grant proposal, which is why the grant proposal is going to have a really big number, is that we would look at operations like yours and say, this is the kind of data that we need to collect. You've already got a scale, so that's not support that you would need. You're going to have data. But part of this process for Build Reuse is to create some technology that makes it easy for you to report your data, because you're going to need to report what you're selling, what items you're selling, what, how the energy that you've expended through deconstruction, taking that building apart, all the parts of the LCA, tracking the carbon and energy footprint that it takes for your operation to put a piece of reclaimed material, whether it's a door, whether it's a window, whether it's a 4x4, and know what that impact is. So when we talk about the technology side of this grant, that is, and that answers the question of, from you, like, we're collecting all of this data, but we want an easier way to upload it. We want an easier way to turn that data into an EPD, which eventually will become a carbon label for your products. And that's the infrastructure that we're asking to be funded through Build Reuse. And that's what we need from all the folks on this call, that if you have an operation, whether it's a store, whether it's a deconstruction education, your interest and willingness to work with us to collect data, so that we can eventually create these EPDs for reclaimed material. So I just want to make sure that folks are really clear that this is not like an individual store opportunity to ask the EPA for that kind of funding.
But also just to emphasize, the output or the result for each individual company or NGO will be what's called a facility level, at your facility level, the environmental product declaration of, at minimum, key products that you are dealing with. So you are contributing both to perhaps an aggregate, the ability to convey the national carbon benefits of the industry, but you will get for yourself your own carbon label of your operations that will be published, has to be published through the grant in national directories of EPDs. You will be able to publish that on your own website. Build Reuse will put a lot into publicizing and conveying that as well to people who access that point of contact. And as Mike noted, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure we saw that there are a couple of folks with their hands raised.
Okay,
Nicole
great.
and C Hill.
Great.
Nicole, I think you had yours raised first. Go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to maybe skip ahead and if it's okay, and ask so we can explain to the group how this might work, is whether we are going to put out an RFP before the grant proposal is submitted for sub applicants, or if that's going to happen after the grant is submitted.
The simple answer is we can't do anything unless the grant is awarded. And the timeline for EPA is roughly, they will announce awardees, I'm going to call it summer of 2024. This application is due on January 16th. And then projects, quote unquote, the overall projects would expect to start roughly September, October 2024. And then it's a 5-year program, so we have a period of organization. One could expect to be trying to do this at the individual facility level, 2025. We are proposing a 3-year cycle, so we spread it out a little bit. 2025, 2026, and 2027.
So just to clarify, you're not going to need anything from us before January 16th other than a letter of support.
Correct. There's no commitment. We can't promise you. And there's no actual RFP until we literally have the funding in hand.
Well, so Brad, this is Jay, let me just try to provide a little bit of clarification. So the term RFP may not be the best term to use. So if we're working with, and the word RFP really deals with for-profits underneath these grants. So certainly you could have sub-grantees that are nonprofits that, you could either decide to identify as part of the proposal or identify that you're going to do them as part of the proposal with a set of entities. And that is certainly allowable. The issue is around when you talk about an RFP, request for proposal, which is usually what you think of a contract, then, that you would usually defer till after you would identify it as a contract in the budget and why you're doing that contracting and developing that RFP, but it would be something that has to go through competition at the back end. So and the reason I want to distinguish that is that contracts have to go through competition where sub-recipients and awards to other nonprofits as part of the execution of the project do not.
I'm not sure that is correct. It is in one way, and it is in another way it's not correct, because a for-profit can apply to this grant on their own. So they are eligible sub-awardees, but only if they fall under the manufacturer or the salvage section. So like a consultant interested would need to have a contract and would need to be competitive. But the reuse organizations that would be applying for your for the EPD program, it doesn't matter if they're nonprofit or for-profit, because I'm pretty sure
you're absolutely
That's
right,
great,
Nicole, and thanks for bringing that up. If you read the NOFO, it is literally either for-profit or nonprofits who, quote, manufacture, refurbish, reprocess, salvage building products. It's a very unusual grant from EPA that
I would,
for-profit is an eligible recipient.
my tendency would be to the degree you can, Brad, and that's just my suggestion is, letters of support, but if you can identify them up front, I don't know if it would require an MOU. That would be the question, is whether or not you have to have MOUs in place by the time you submit this, or if you just want to do it through letters of support.
Well, the problem there, and we're getting into details.
I was just
in
gonna say
order
that.
to do that, you would need to have all of this in place today, and we don't. We
Yeah,
need to get the
okay.
money to do it. Yes.
Okay. All right.
If
Hey,
we can
Brad.
put a pin in that discussion for a second, there are a couple questions in the chat that I really don't want to lose, that are, I think, critical to understanding this group's involvement. First of
Yes.
all, Crystal asked if we have models, white papers, or best use practices that may be shared to ensure data output is properly captured and consistent. And related, Jackie asked, does anybody know how best to collect all these data points? Are there already established best practices?
Yes.
Okay,
Simple
yeah,
answer. It's
Okay.
all about international and national and industry-wide norms. So we
and
got
these
it
will be
covered.
shared with the people we
They will
are
be literally
bringing in to collect. Yeah, okay.
that will be literally a determinant of the award, the ability to do that, and we will be there to ensure that it's done correctly. Yes.
Great. And then C Hill has had her hand raised, so their hand raised, excuse me. So I just wanted to make sure they got to answer their question, ask their question.
So actually, that was my question.
Okay.
Because the last thing that I saw from the EPA was from 2016, the weight conversion factors, a memorandum, and then I go under a state level where we need to provide numbers, or we are providing numbers to our state level, and so there's all these different, like for a 2x4, what's the standard
Right.
weight going to be? So that was also my question. So you've answered it.
And just to get also wonky, that would be considered background data that someone else collected that you are referencing. This is about the quote primary data of your operation. So it's you developing the metrics literally on the ground at your own facility, not relying upon that kind of background. The best data is literally the primary data.
So wait, are you saying that whatever metrics that we have already established and that we are submitting to our state government, that is preferred than if you guys had a standard set weight conversions and metrics?
Only if that data you are submitting is something you generated. Otherwise, it's the same. If the state gave you some conversion factor or I gave you some conversion factor, that's a secondary source. We want you to try to establish your own system. Whether you decide you agree with the state conversions or not, but you are the one who's saying, yes, this is what we use because we think it's true. Does that make sense? I'm parsing words here, but
No, it makes sense. You want raw data
correct.
from our organic beginnings.
And if you like the data or you took a 2x4 and measured it and it came up with the same amount that the state gave you, then you say, sure, that's good. As we all know, in this case, say species of lumber have different weights, so you just would be talking about, I say Douglas fir in the Northwest, so what's the conversion of that? Not, I don't know, oak or something from somewhere else. Yes.
Are we gonna maybe create, sorry to kind of interrupt, but are we gonna create some standards for people to make sure that they're following, like only use dry weight, not wet weight, like just things like that, so that we all are, even if we're not using the same actual weight, we're using the same standards around what weight we're collecting.
Absolutely, and as well as sampling, so that you don't have to literally measure every object all year long. What is an appropriate sample method? That goes back to the data quality, and we're in the weeds again. This is not only about lumber. We are very consciously considering the different market, material market segments. So lumber, brick, furniture, doors, cabinets, these are all important categories of products from the reuse industry. So they each have their own LCA EPD category, if that answers that question. If all you did was reclaim lumber, then that's the only thing you're producing an EPD for. But if you have a mix of materials, you're going to produce outputs around those materials. Different materials may have different levels of processing or handling. So we're trying to get at, for example, if something takes a lot more energy to deal with than something else, then that would be reflected in its environmental footprint. I hope that answers. Heavy things require more fuel to transport than light things.
Brad, I wonder if you could take a look at Jackie's questions, just a few up from in the chat, to clarify what exactly we are trying to assess with our data tracking. Is it just weight, the tonnage diverted into our operations? And how does this data translate to an EPD?
Okay, so a life cycle analysis is at its core an input-output to do something, to provide a good or a service. It is, in effect, analyzing that process and what are the environmental impacts of doing whatever it is. So I could just take you simply through, say, the transport of things to your reuse facility. That's an impact. It uses gasoline or diesel or electricity even. The operation of your building requires fundamentally electricity, maybe natural gas, water. You might have waste from whatever happens to some of those products once they've been taken in. So you might be doing something, or some are not really repairable, or whatever happens. So you have an impact of waste. You have an output of the things you sell. And in life cycle analysis, the outputs also are the emissions of, say, greenhouse gases. So for every literally sort of pound of thing that you produce, there's going to be this sort of backpack of environmental effects that are a result of whatever you had to do in order to output that product. So that's it in a super nutshell. Transportation, operational energy of equipment on your site or your building, the amount of waste that you create, the amount of products that you produce. You do not have to count human labor. There's no kind of carbon footprint of human labor. It's desirable to know the transport out of your facility to the job site, but that's not essential. It's about eight basic things that you're going to collect data on. And it sounds simple when I said it, but of course you're trying to parse the different products that you bring in and track all these things.
And so then, Brad, can you clarify, we will need letters of support from these organizations before our January deadline. And in that letter of support, a reuse operation doesn't necessarily need to commit to that data tracking work.
What
They're
we'd
just,
like- sorry,
go ahead.
but we'd love it if they said, we are, whatever word you like, interested, extremely interested, willing.
And we will create a template letter of support.
Yes.
Yep.
So it's up to you how to phrase it, but an expression of interest, whatever way you interpret that. And again, it's all predicated on actually getting the award. You're not signing up for anything that is out of your pocket, let's call it.
But it would be incredibly awesome if we had, 50 or 60 letters of support from building material reuse stores, from deconstruction contractors that, identified what you do and who you are and said, we would, we would positively respond to a request from Build Reuse to capture data as part of this process.
Yeah, I'll let Mike write the template.
I mean, that would basically that would basically show the EPA that we have broad industry support, that we have a very large data set, that we're going to be collecting data. And it's also really important that we get geographical representation. So we need stores on the West Coast, we need stores on the East Coast, we need deconstructors in the Midwest, we need them in the West, we need them in the Southeast. That's what's really going to make this proposal really strong, is that we're showing the willingness of folks to provide data, and lots of data.
Yeah, but again, remember, it's to your benefit through your individual store, even though in aggregate, we could call it something called an industry-wide average could be produced, but our direction is to try to start at the fine grain because there's nothing currently existing. And I see Francis had kind of a question about that. Yes, Francis, I really thought a lot about broader kind of abilities, say an industry-wide, but I think of all of this as unit processes. And as far as it can be modularized, which it will be, if it goes into something like the federal LCA Commons, well, we are generating data that others could use, say a new product manufacturer, about potential end of life, then I think there's going to be a broader benefit to everyone, because this industry is fundamentally dealing with that end of life of products. We are crossing between the new product life and the second life system, as they call it.
Before we close up the hour, I see Melissa has her hand raised, but also first, I think Sonia brings up a really important point, and that's supporting organizations gathering this information. Would they be eligible for capacity grants? And I think that's an important piece, is that much of this funding we're getting is passed through grants to these supporting organizations who are doing the actual work on the ground.
Correct.
Okay, and Melissa?
I was just going to add in comments of support that I've added into the chat is that this is probably difficult to do, to imagine, because it's not about shovel-ready projects and physical things. It's about investing in our industry so that we can have a level playing field with all the folks that are probably creating EPDs for new materials that have lower carbon footprints. So I think of this as a really, really great opportunity to really either level the playing field or actually give us the leverage that we deserve to have a better voice in the material use marketplace. That's all.
Ditto. Please don't be hesitant to write to grants at bmra.org. If you are willing to consider a letter of support, and we will send you the template. If you have additional questions, is there anything you'd like to add, Mike? I know we're at 1 o'clock.
I apologize. There were sorry, just wanted to say there's numerous questions we didn't get to. So I will collect all of these and make sure that the right people get the right answers. So thanks for that.
Okay. Anything, Mike, Shannon, Natalie?
I guess I would just do, there was some later questions in the chat, which I think, to Natalie's point, we can respond to a little bit, you know, with more clarity. But none of this is about recycling. Like, none of this is about recycled content. This is about extending the end of life materials that reuse stores generally deal with. So lumber, doors, windows, plumbing fixtures, light fixtures, finishes, that kind of stuff. I think there were some really great questions at the end that deal with recycled content, materials, and prioritizing those materials. And this particular grant is specifically focused on reuse of material.
For us, there is steel and concrete, which may be recycled products, but that is not defined as salvage.
All right, well, Brad, I think we'll just address the questions separately after the call, and we really appreciate everybody's participation.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.